We're going to analyse now for you the economic repercussions of these French elections. Joined here in the studio by our business editor, Brian Quinn. Brian, markets pretty badly spooked by all this political upheaval. What are we seeing so far today?
So, Stuart, European markets have just opened a few minutes ago. We're actually seeing a big bounce on the CAC 40 index here in Paris. It is up 2.5%. Investors looking, it would seem, mostly at a hung parliament here in France as the best potential outcome out of some less than ideal outcomes overall. It is looking like that's what they might get. Big bounce on the CAC 40 there. Most notably, we're seeing gains in the French banking sector, which, of course, has also taken a big hit recently, though. Société Générale up 7%, BNP Paribas there up over 5%. That gain in stocks, as I was talking about, though, comes after a big sell-off in French assets. The CAC 40 lost about 6.5% in June after Macron called those snap elections. That wiped out around 200 billion euros in market value. Now, there's been a big sell-off in French sovereign debt as well. Talk for a minute about bond yields. That's essentially the premium that investors demand for taking the risk of lending money to the government. Investors that were recently demanding 0.9% higher yield to hold French debt than Germany. That is the widest spread since the Eurozone debt crisis back in 2012. That spread has been easing a bit in recent days, but remaining quite wide. The shrinking of the spread, perhaps one of the reasons that we're seeing French banks doing especially well today. Now, there is, though, actually some speculation that if a sell-off in French government bonds were to continue or even spread across Europe, the European Central Bank could be compelled to intervene in debt markets, buying up French debt via its transmission protection instrument. Here's the ECB's chief economist on that.
We will not tolerate unwarranted and disorderly market dynamics that would pose a serious threat to the transmission of monetary policy. We cannot have a case where essentially market panic, market illiquidity, market sentiment disrupts our monetary policy.
And this comes as well, doesn't it, Brian, back in many ways to France's already high levels of sovereign debt and high deficits.
Big story on debt, of course, around this entire election, Stuart. Now, you can say President Macron, of course, has had some economic successes, notably bringing the unemployment rate here down to a 4-decade low of 7.1%. That was in early 23, though. That rate has since crept back up to 7.5%. Macron has also brought billions of euros worth of foreign investment with business-friendly measures like cutting taxes on corporations and the wealthy, as well as reforms to the country's labor code to make hiring and firing easier. His next target, as Peter was talking about, was going to be France's unemployment insurance system. That plan likely scrapped for the moment, at least. The problem, of course, is that Macron's supply-side economic policies have not resulted in the kind of economic growth needed to reduce the country's sovereign debt load. GDP growth for last year was at just 0.9%. Projections for this year sitting at a very anemic 0.7%. Of course, Macron's government spent big to shield the French economy during the COVID pandemic and the European energy crisis. Big spending plus low taxes equals a big debt. Surprise. French public debt currently standing at 3 trillion euros. That is 110.6% of GDP. It's nearly double the official EU limit. The country's deficit for 2023 hitting 5.5% of GDP. The EU limit there is 3%. So again, nearly double. And Brussels has opened an official disciplinary procedure against France. Standard & Poor's, a rating agency, recently downgraded France's debt rating. And of course, the president's decision to throw French politics into chaos in this way has not helped matters much, as analysts point out. Take a listen.
The dissolution of the National Assembly has provoked a certain amount of fear on the part of our European and international partners. We can see that just in terms of our interest rates on the financial markets, our credibility is somewhat diminished.
So that leaves markets then essentially worried that the end of Macron's economic policies could mean even more debt.
So the fear being here, Stuart, that a new French government of either the far-right National Rally or the left New Popular Front could drive, of course, France even deeper into debt. It is true that the two opponents both have some ambitious spending plans. The National Rally wants to cut sales tax on fuel and electricity. It wants to index pensions to inflation, wants to cut taxes on local businesses. The cost of its plan is estimated at around 120 billion euros per year. It intends to fund that in part via cuts to benefits for immigrants. Analysts, though, say the savings there would only amount to around 18 billion euros. That could potentially blow an even bigger hole in the French budget. Turning to the New Popular Front, also wanting to spend big, the left aiming for 25 billion euros in new public spending this year and 100 billion in 2025. Measures like raising salaries for public workers, raising the minimum wage by 200 euros a month, investing to rebuild underfunded public services that would be paid for by taxing corporations and the wealthy, taxes on super profits, taxes on large inheritance, on the wealth of billionaires, ending tax shelters. A lot of new taxes, but they're ones that an analysis shows would fall mainly on the top 10% and even more on the top 5 and 1% of earners. Worth pointing out that a group of 300 French economists, including a number of highly regarded authors and scholars like Thomas Piketty, published an op-ed recently insisting that actually the New Popular Front's plan is in fact fairly feasible and not unreasonable and does respond to the needs of French society. Talk about raising taxes, obviously. Investors are going to get nervous. They don't tend to like that, but the economists have pointed out that in fact the plan is not terribly far-fetched.
Brian, thanks very much.